There's something haunting about the hushed ruins of a forgotten place where the wind carries echoes of voices long gone, and the stones seem to hum with secrets. Picture this, a crumbling port town, its once bustling docks now skeletal fingers grasping at the sea, as if trying to pull back the souls who vanished here centuries ago. This isn't just any abandoned harbor. This is the place where sailors whispered of stepping through the air itself, only to return with impossible stories of cities that shimmered like mirages, of skies painted in colors no human eye had ever seen. Welcome to the legend of the Mythical Gateway, a medieval mystery that blurs the line between history and fantasy. For generations, this town was a footnote in dusty chronicles, a nameless dot on maps that cartographers eventually scrubbed away. But the stories persisted. Fishermen spoke of fog that didn't behave like fog, of tides that defied the moon's pull, and of men who boarded their ships at dawn only to reappear at dusk, their beards grown long, their eyes haunted by wonders they couldn't explain. Was it madness, mass hysteria, or was there something deeper hidden in the geography of this place, something that cracked open the fabric of the world itself? Today, we're piecing together the puzzle of this eerie port where history and myth collide. We'll trace the footsteps of those who claimed to cross into another realm, examine the cryptic clues left in ancient manuscripts, and even delve into the ghostly sightings that still plague the town's rotting piers. By the time we're done, you might just wonder, could there be places on this earth where the rules don't apply, where the veil between worlds grows thin? Stick around, because what you're about to hear will make you look at the forgotten corners of the map in a whole new light. At its height, this port town pulsed with life, sails snapping in the wind, merchants haggling over silks and spices, the air thick with the clamor of a dozen languages. It was the kind of place where a sailor could vanish into the crowd and reappear years later with a fortune or a fantastical tale. The harbor thrived because it sat at the crossroads of empires, a rare neutral ground where rival kingdoms set aside their swords to chase gold instead. But empires rise and fall like tides, and when the great trade routes shifted inland, the town's lifeblood drained away, ships stopped coming, warehouses stood empty. The once grand docks rotted into the water, their timbers groaning like old men sighing over lost glory. Yet abandonment has a way of breeding legends. With no one left to drown out the whispers, the stories grew louder, tales of strange lights flickering over the water at night, of fishermen who swore they glimpsed towers in the mist where no towers should be. Locals claimed the town didn't just fade into obscurity, it was reclaimed. By what exactly, no one could agree. Some said the sea, angry at being forsaken, sent creeping salt water to swallow the streets. Others insisted something far older had been waiting beneath the waves all along, biding its time until the noise of humanity faded enough for it to rise. And then there were the disappearances, not just the slow trickle of families leaving for better prospects, but the kind that left no trace. A lone wanderer last seen heading toward the shore at dusk, a child chasing a ball into the fog, never to return. These weren't just tragedies, they became proof that the town wasn't dead but changed, that its empty streets weren't a graveyard but a threshold. After all, gates swing both ways. If people could vanish here, couldn't they also return? That's when the Pilgrims came. Not merchants or sailors, but seekers of the uncanny, mystics and madmen. Scholars clutching yellowed maps, all drawn by rumors of a place where the world grew thin. They'd stand on the broken piers at dawn, straining their eyes for a glimpse of something beyond the horizon. Most saw nothing, but a handful. They'd step into the mist and never step back. The earliest accounts read like pages torn from a sailor's nightmare ships gliding into the harbor's embrace, only to dissolve into the mist as if swallowed whole. Witnesses spoke of vessels with sails like cobwebs, their decks eerily silent, drifting toward the horizon with no crew in sight. One particularly chilling entry in a 15th century logbook describes a merchant ship, the White Gull, vanishing in broad daylight. It had been anchored just offshore when a sudden fog rolled in, thick and unnatural. By the time it lifted, the ship was gone, no wreckage, no cries for help, as if the sea itself had folded around it. But here's what chills the bones. Some of these ships did return, decades later, empty. A fisherman in the 1600s claimed to spot the White Gull's ghostly silhouette at dawn, its hull encrusted with barnacles that shouldn't exist in local waters, its timbers bleached pale as bone. When townsfolk boarded it, they found the cargo holds intact, spices still fragrant, silks untouched by time, but not a single soul remained, even stranger. The ship's log ended mid-sentence. The final entry dated the very day it had vanished 50 years prior. Scholars dismissed these stories as superstitious drivel, the kind of tales spun by men too long at sea. But then the letters surfaced. Hidden in the archives of a distant monastery was a crumbling parchment penned by a monk who'd once been a sailor. He confessed that his own brother had sailed into that mist and returned, aged decades in mere hours, babbling of a city where the streets twisted like serpents and the sky burned violet. The monk swore his brother's hair had turned white, not with age but with terror. So what really happened to those ships? Modern researchers point to the harbor's unique geography, a confluence of tides and underwater rock formations that could spawn sudden, violent currents. But that doesn't explain the accounts of phantom crews, the uncanny preservation of the wrecks, or the whispers of a distant bell tolling from beneath the waves whenever a ship disappeared. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, or perhaps, as the old fishermen mutter, the gate doesn't always close behind those who pass through. The legend of the Moonlit Gateway wasn't born from drunken tavern talk or the scribblings of lonely shepherds. It came from too many witnesses, too many consistent accounts, all describing the same impossible sight. The story always began the same way, a night when the moon swelled unnaturally large, its silver light turning the waves to liquid mercury. Then, as the tide reached its peak, the air above the water would ripple like heat off a desert dune, twisting itself into the shape of an archway. Not solid, not stone, but something woven from mist and moonlight. Those who dared to row close swore the arch hummed, a sound like distant chimes or a choir singing just beyond the edge of hearing. And through it, a city, not ruins, not some sunken Atlantis, but a place alive with movement, its spires glowing with a light that wasn't fire, its streets bustling with shadows that didn't quite walk like men. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a 16th century nun, Sister Marguerite, who recorded the testimony of a fisherman named Luca. He'd been repairing his nets near the abandoned docks when the gateway appeared. Luca described stepping into a small boat drawn toward the arch as if pulled by an invisible current. The moment he passed beneath it, the sea around him changed. The water turned black as ink, yet somehow translucent, revealing shapes moving far below. The air smelled of salt and something sweet, like fruit left to rot in the sun. And the city, he claimed its towers weren't built from stone, but from something that shifted when you blinked, as if the buildings themselves couldn't decide what shape to take. But here's the detail that chills the blood. Luca swore he saw people there, figures robed in silver, faces obscured, walking toward him with hands outstretched. He rowed backward so violently his boat nearly capsized. When he turned to look again, the gateway was gone, but his oar was wet with water that glittered like crushed pearls, a substance that evaporated by morning, leaving behind only a faint floral stench. Skeptics, of course, have explanations. They point to rare atmospheric conditions, a combination of moonlight refracting through sea spray and methane gas rising from decaying matter in the harbor. They say the gateway was just a complex mirage, the music, the groan of shifting tides echoing through hollow cliffs. But that doesn't account for the physical traces, the handful of artifacts that supposedly came back through the arch. A bronze cup stamped with symbols matching no known language, a length of fabric that wouldn't burn, wouldn't tear, and turned ice cold to the touch on hot summer days. Most of these objects were lost to time, locked away in private collections or buried with the few souls who brought them home. And then there's the silence. After the 1800s, sightings of the Moonlit Gateway grew scarce, as if whatever power fueled it was fading. The last recorded account comes from a lighthouse keeper's journal in 1923. He wrote of seeing the arch one final time, not over the water, but in the mirror of his own lighthouse lantern. By the time he turned to look, it had vanished, but the glass stayed fogged for hours, and no amount of wiping could clear it. So what was it? A doorway to another world, as the legends claim, a glitch in reality, a place where time and space folded just enough to let something through. Or simply the collective longing of a town that refused to be forgotten, weaving its own myth to keep the shadows at bay. Maybe some questions aren't meant for answering. But stand on those crumbling docks tonight under the right moon, and you might just hear it, the whisper of something waiting on the other side. The story of the wandering scholar begins like so many others, a stranger stepping out of the mist, his boots caked with the dust of distant roads. But this man was different. He didn't come to trade or beg. He carried a journal bound in cracked leather, its pages crammed with sketches so precise they made the villagers uneasy. There was the abandoned port town, yes, but not as they knew it. His drawings showed the crumbling docks alive with strange symbols, etched into the wood as if by no human hand. And then there were the other sketches, structures that didn't belong, arches of light hovering just above the waves, figures with elongated shadows standing where no one should have been. The scholar, who gave his name only as Elias, claimed to have found an ancient manuscript in a monastery's darkest corner. Its language was forgotten, its ink faded to ghostly traces, but he'd spent years piecing together its meaning. It spoke of a doorway not built by human hands that opened when certain stars aligned, a gateway that didn't lead to another place but to another state where time, space, and even the laws of nature unraveled like old thread. The manuscript warned of a price for crossing. Some who stepped through returned hollow-eyed, their memories frayed at the edges. Others didn't return at all. For 3 nights, Elias holed up in the village tavern, scribbling feverishly by candlelight. He barely slept, barely ate. The tavern keeper later swore the man would mutter to himself in a language that sounded like wind through a crypt. Then, on the 4th morning, his room was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. The candle had burned down to a nub, its wax pooled in the shape of a key. And the journal, left open on the table, its final page torn roughly in half. What remained was a single phrase scrawled in frantic letters. They don't want us to know about the journal's surviving pages are a labyrinth of riddles. One passage describes a ritual, a sequence of steps to be taken on the docks at midnight, involving salt, iron, and a chant in a tongue Elias called the speech of the gatekeepers. Another page holds a sketch of a peculiar symbol, 3 interlocking circles, like ripples from stones thrown into water. Modern researchers have since found that same symbol carved into the stones of the abandoned town's oldest well, hidden beneath centuries of grime. But the most chilling entry is a list of names: sailors, merchants, even children, each with a date beside it. cross-referencing local records reveals something unsettling. Every name matches a person reported missing near the port town on the exact dates given. At the bottom of the list, Elias had written 2 words in shaky ink: "Not lost." So what became of him? Some say he grew too close to the truth and fled before whatever guards the gateway could reach him. Others whisper that he did find the doorway and stepped through, leaving behind only his journal as a warning. As for the torn page, a handful of villagers swore they saw a scrap of parchment caught in the brambles near the old docks years later. The ink was blurred by rain, but one word remained legible: hunger. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't the gateway itself, but why the scholar's journal survived at all. Was it an accident, or was it left deliberately like bait in a trap? A way to lure the next curious soul toward the mist, toward the arch, toward the thing that waits on the other side. Official records from the port town's golden age are frustratingly mundane lists of cargo, tax rolls, the dry administrative hum of a thriving trade hub. Not a single parchment mentions ships vanishing into mist or moonlight gateways, but history is written by those who hold the ink, and sometimes the most telling details hide in the margins. Take the logbook of Harbour Master Reynold of Vaux, a man so meticulous he recorded the number of nails used to repair each dock. In the summer of 1428, his usual crisp entries grow erratic. One page bears a water-stained smear where a date should be, followed by a single sentence: "The bells rang from the sea today. The men refused to speak of it." Then nothing. The next dozen pages are torn out, the remaining ones resuming as if nothing had happened. Or consider the case of Sister Isabella's illuminated manuscript, a devotional text painstakingly copied in a nearby convent. Between psalms, someone, perhaps the nun herself, scratched a tiny drawing in the corner of a page: a ship half submerged in swirling fog, its mast piercing an archway of light. Beneath it, in letters so small they're nearly invisible: "Ora pro nobis, pray for us." Why hide such an image in a holy book unless the truth was too dangerous to state plainly? Then there's the matter of the missing years. Port towns like this were required by royal decree to submit annual reports to the crown. Yet between 1451 and 1453, no records exist at all, just a gap in the archives, as if someone had carefully excised them. A royal clerk's notation cryptically states, "The matter of the Western Harbour is concluded. Let it not be raised again." Concluded how? By whom? The phrasing suggests not an administrative oversight, but a deliberate silencing. Perhaps most chilling is the account of a visiting notary who inspected the town's records in 1602. He wrote to his superiors that he'd found evidence of unusual disappearances among the dockworkers, but his full report was never delivered. The draft survives in a private family archive, its final pages blacked out with thick ink. Only one legible line remains. They say the gate opens for those who do not know how to knock. So why the silence? Fear of heresy charges, a royal decree to suppress panic, or something darker, a pact made to keep the hungry thing beyond the gateway from noticing the wider world? Whatever the reason, the omissions tell their own story. When history goes quiet, listen carefully. The gaps between the words are where the old truths whisper loudest. The artifacts pulled from the mud near the old harbour aren't just mysterious, they're wrong. Take the coins, for instance. At first glance, they look like ordinary medieval currency, stamped with the usual crosses and crowns. But flip them over, and you'll find symbols that don't match any alphabet, any kingdom, any era. Curved lines that twist like vines, geometric shapes that hurt the eyes if you stare too long. One particularly unsettling piece, now locked in a university vault, bears a mark that several linguists swear resembles a word, but not in any human language. One researcher described the sensation of touching it as like holding a whisper you weren't meant to hear. Then there are the tools, rusted blades and hooks, yes, but the metal doesn't behave like iron or bronze. When subjected to tests, the alloy defied classification. Its composition included traces of elements that shouldn't exist in medieval metallurgy, let alone blend so seamlessly. A blacksmith who examined one dagger claimed it stayed ice cold in a blazing forge, its edge never dulling no matter how many times it was sharpened. But the real enigma, the way these objects were found, not scattered by time or tide, but deliberately arranged, a shovel's blade pointing due north. A set of hooks laid in a perfect circle, as if marking something beneath the earth, and then there's the slab, a flat, weathered stone roughly the size of a tombstone, unearthed near the old customs house. At first, archaeologists assumed it was a boundary marker until they cleaned it. Etched into its surface was a map, but not of any coastline recorded in history. The landmasses were jagged, unnatural, with rivers that forked at impossible angles and mountains clustered in spirals. Most unsettling of all, a single symbol carved deep at the center, 3 interlocking circles, the same design Elias the scholar had drawn in his journal centuries later. Experts have tried to dismiss these finds as hoaxes, but the dating doesn't lie. The coins, the tools, the slab, they all match the town's heyday, centuries before anyone could fabricate such anomalies. And then there's the placement. Every artifact was found along what would have been the harbor's edge, clustered where the old docks met the water, as if whatever left them was following a path or marking a door. Perhaps most chilling is what hasn't been found. No bones, no pottery, no traces of the people who must have held these objects. It's as if the artifacts were dropped by visitors who didn't leave footprints. Or worse, who didn't need to. So what are we to make of these silent witnesses? Proof of travelers from a place we can't chart, debris washed through the gateway from some other shore, or something far older, buried long before the port town rose, waiting for the sea to spit it back into the light. The answers, if they exist, might lie deeper still, not in the soil, but in the spaces between the symbols, in the gaps where history refuses to speak. Even now, when the sun dips below the horizon, you won't find a single soul lingering near the ruins of the old port. The villagers have long memories, and their superstitions run deeper than the harbor's silt. Walk the overgrown path to the town's edge at twilight, and you'll spot them small bundles of salt wrapped in cloth, rusted nails driven into tree trunks, iron coins left at the base of crumbling walls. These aren't random acts of vandalism, they're offerings, precautions, a whispered plea to whatever still walks those broken streets when the moon is high. The rituals vary, but the intent is always the same, to keep the travelers from beyond at bay. Salt, they say, scatters unseen paths, iron anchors the restless. Some families still teach their children the old rhyme, its origins lost to time. Mind the mist, child, mind the tide, never step where the two collide. Others insist on hanging a sickle above their door frames, the curve of the blade mirroring the arch of the fabled gateway, as if to mock or mimic its shape into submission. But the most telling tradition happens every year on the autumn equinox, when the veil between worlds is said to thin. At midnight, the oldest woman in the village, always a woman, never a man, walks to the boundary where the town meets the wild grass. She carries a bowl of seawater mixed with ashes from the last hearth fire, and without a word she pours it into the earth. No one speaks of what it means, only that it must be done. Outsiders laugh, calling it quaint folklore, but the villagers know better. They've heard the stories of what happens when the rituals are forgotten. Like the winter of 1894, when a traveling merchant scoffed at their warnings and camped in the ruins to prove his bravery. By dawn, his tent stood empty, the coals of his fire still glowing. His journal lay open, the final entry smudged as if wet fingers had dragged across the page, and on the ground beside it, a single footprint facing the sea, but the toes were too long, the arch too high, as if something wearing his shape had stepped out of its skin. So why do these customs persist in an age of streetlights and satellites? Perhaps because some truths don't fade with time. The villagers may not understand the gateway, but they respect it. They've seen how the mist still coils thicker over the old docks on windless nights, how dogs growl at empty air where the road curves toward the shore. And they remember the last words of old Tomas, the fisherman who vanished in 1958 after drunkenly shouting he'd go see for himself. They found his boat drifting a mile out, the nets full of fish that had been dead for weeks, their eyes milky with rot, yet their flesh still warm, as if whatever waters they'd swum in hadn't gotten around to noticing time yet. The offerings aren't just tradition, they're a bargain, a way of saying, we remember you, now stay where you belong, because the unspoken fear isn't that the gateway is gone, it's that it's merely sleeping. And one day, when the stars align just so, when the right voice whispers the right words, it might wake hungry. Science offers its own kind of magic, the kind that turns myths into mysteries waiting to be solved. When researchers first turned their attention to the abandoned port town, they didn't arrive with tales of gateways or ghosts. They came with instruments, maps, and a simple question: could the natural world have conspired to create these legends? The theories are as intriguing as the stories themselves. Picture a moonlit night where dense sea fog rolls in, not as a blanket, but as a twisting, shimmering curtain. Under just the right conditions, temperature layers in the atmosphere can bend light like a prism, warping reflections into impossible shapes. Sailors might have seen their own ships distorted into phantom vessels, or the glow of distant stars magnified into towering cities hovering above the waves. Then there's the harbor's geology, a labyrinth of underwater caves carved by ancient rivers, their tunnels still hidden beneath the seabed. When tides surge, water forced through these passages can produce eerie groans, even vibrations strong enough to rattle the docks. Combine that with pockets of methane gas rising from decaying organic matter, and you've got a recipe for hallucinations. In high enough concentrations, these gases can induce dizziness, blurred vision, even vivid waking dreams. Imagine a fisherman breathing in that air, his mind conjuring archways of light while his body sways with the rhythm of the sea. But the most compelling theory lies in the earth itself. Magnetic surveys reveal anomalies along the coastline pockets where compass needles spin wildly, as if tugged by invisible hands. Similar disturbances have been documented in places like the Michigan Triangle and the Bermuda Archipelago, where electromagnetic quirks coincide with legends of vanishings. Some scientists suggest these magnetic hiccups could disrupt human perception, scrambling inner senses of direction and time. A sailor caught in such a field might swear hours passed in minutes, or stare into what he thinks is fog, only to realize too late it's a sheer cliff face his brain refused to see. Yet for all these explanations, gaps remain. Why do the accounts span centuries, yet describe the same uncanny details, the same archway, the same singing mist? Natural phenomena are random, chaotic. They don't follow scripts, and what of the physical traces, the cold metal tools, the unreadable coins? Science can't yet explain why these objects resist classification, or why they cluster so precisely along the waterfront, as if placed there deliberately. Perhaps the truth isn't one or the other, but both a collision of the measurable and the unimaginable. The town's unique geography may have set the stage, but the stories, They feel like something older, something that recognized a weakness in the fabric of that place and pressed through. After all, legends don't cling to just any stretch of coast. They settle where the world is thin, and sometimes the most scientific answer is admitting that some doors, once opened, refuse to stay shut. The legend of the abandoned port town doesn't stand alone. Scattered across the globe like fragments of a shattered mirror are other places where the ordinary rules of reality seem to bend, where ships, planes, and even entire crews have slipped through the cracks of the known world. Take the Bermuda Triangle, that infamous stretch of ocean between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. For centuries, sailors have told of compasses spinning wildly, of radios falling silent, of vessels vanishing without so much as a distress call. The stories echo with eerie familiarity: sudden fogs that shouldn't exist, lights moving beneath the waves, and most chilling of all, ships found adrift, their crews gone without a trace, as if plucked from the deck by invisible hands. Then there are the phantom ships of Japan, the Yurei, ghostly vessels said to materialize in the mist off the coast, their sails tattered, their decks manned by silhouettes that never speak or turn their faces toward the living. Fishermen whisper of hearing laughter or sobbing from these apparitions, only for the ships to dissolve into the air like smoke. And let's not forget the Flying Dutchman, the spectral ship doomed to sail forever after its captain made a reckless oath against the storm. Every culture that's ever dared to cross the water seems to have its own version of the tale, a place, a moment where the boundary between here and elsewhere grows thin. But here's what ties them together: the details. It's never just a ship lost to a storm or a crew claimed by the deep. There's always something uncanny, a malfunctioning instrument, a fog that defies the wind, a silence where there should be noise. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous legends speak of canoes paddling into coves only to emerge in another time entirely. In the Baltic, medieval chronicles describe holes in the sea that swallowed Viking longships whole. Even the ancient Greeks warned of the clashing rocks, a shifting passage that crushed ships like eggshells unless they navigated it at just the right moment. So what does this mean for our abandoned port town? Perhaps it wasn't an anomaly, but a single stitch in a vast, invisible tapestry, a place where the threads of the world frayed just enough to let something through. Some researchers suggest these spots align with hidden geological faults, electromagnetic anomalies, or even underwater ley lines. Others argue it's something older, something woven into the fabric of human fear and wonder. After all, every culture that tells these stories does so with the same hushed reverence, the same certainty that some doors should remain unopened, the most unsettling theory. That these gateways aren't accidents but landmarks, that they've always been there waiting, and sometimes when the conditions are just right, something on the other side reaches back. Eyewitness accounts of the impossible cling to this harbor like salt to ancient wood. The earliest comes from Brother Anselm, a Benedictine monk who kept a secret diary alongside his holy texts. In 1384, he recorded a storm unlike any other, not of wind or rain, but of light. Fishermen had rowed into the bay at dusk when the water began to glow, first blue, then a sickly green. Those who tried to flee described their oars passing through the luminescence as if through smoke, only for the light to suddenly solidify around their boats like a hand closing. 2 vessels vanished that night. The sole survivor, a deckhand named Matteo, washed ashore at dawn babbling of a great eye beneath the waves. Brother Anselm's final entry on the matter is chilling in its simplicity. The abbot has forbidden us to speak of it. But God watches even when men turn away. 2 centuries later, a Dutch merchant's letter to his wife describes a different horror. Anchored near the abandoned docks in 1609, he awoke to the sound of knocking against his hull, not the random tap of driftwood, but a rhythm, a pattern. When he lit a lantern and peered over the side, the water was perfectly still. Yet the knocking continued, now coming from inside the ship's hold. His crew found nothing, but the next morning, every barrel of salted fish had spoiled, their contents blackened and stinking of sweet decay. The merchant's handwriting grows frantic as he adds a postscript. Jan swears he saw them last night, shadows on the dock with no men to cast them. They were waiting for low tide. Then there's the case of Elodie Durand, the French painter who came to the ruins in 1842 seeking inspiration. Her sketches, now kept under lock and key in a Parisian archive, show something that shouldn't exist, a structure of impossible angles hovering just above the waterline, its spires twisting like melted wax. In her journal, she claims to have painted it from life over 3 sleepless nights, only for the dawn to reveal an empty horizon. The final page holds a single smear of violet pigment and the words, "It wasn't a castle. It was a cage." What unites these accounts across 600 years isn't just the terror, but the precision. The monk, the merchant, the artist, none described shapeless phantoms. They recorded details that linger in the mind's eye, the mechanical rhythm of the knocking, the architectural perversion of Elodie's towers, the way Matteo's great eye was said to blink vertically. These aren't the ramblings of fever dreams, they're incident reports. Modern psychologists might dismiss them as mass hysteria or oxygen deprivation from methane seeps. But that doesn't explain why a 21st-century marine biologists go pro footage, taken during a routine survey in 2012, captured 13 seconds of something dark and vast moving against the current, a shape that dissolved into pixels when analyzed frame by frame. Or why the last lighthouse keeper, retiring in 1987, left behind a logbook with one underlined sentence: "They're not hallucinations if they leave footprints." Perhaps the most unsettling truth lies in what these witnesses didn't say. None spoke of ghosts or demons. They described phenomena that behaved with purpose, with rules, a light that hunted, a tide that obeyed no moon, a city that only appeared to those who looked at it sideways. These weren't encounters with the supernatural, but with something older, something that simply operates differently. And if that's the case, the real question isn't whether these people lied or imagined things. It's whether they saw just enough to drive them mad, or just enough to glimpse the truth. The attic of the old sea captain's house smelled of damp wood and salt-stained paper when they found it, a leather-bound logbook wedged between rotting beams, its pages brittle as autumn leaves. The sailor who penned it never gave his name, but the dates place his voyage in the summer of 1898, a time when the abandoned port town was little more than a ghost story told in taverns. His entries start like any other sailor's: weather notes, cargo tallies, complaints about the cook's dreadful porridge. But by the 7th page, the tone shifts. It begins with the fog, not the thick, woolly mist common to those waters, but something he describes as thin as a bride's veil and just as restless. His crew spotted it first near the ruins of the old docks, hovering motionless despite the wind. Then came the light's pinpricks at first, like distant lanterns, until they swelled into something that made hardened sailors clutch their charms. The diary's sketch of what they saw is crude but unmistakable. A city of jagged towers, their surfaces reflecting the moon in ways glass shouldn't, as if the buildings themselves were alive with movement. The final entry is where the handwriting fractures into near illegible scrawls. They'd anchored near the ruins against the mate's warnings and rowed ashore at dusk. What they found wasn't the empty husk of a town, but a place wrong in its bones. Streets curved where they should have been straight, doorways led to walls. And the figures the sailor insists they weren't shadows, weren't tricks of the light. They moved like people, but their limbs bent at angles that made his stomach heave. The last line, ink blotted as if the pen had been snatched from his grasp, reads, "They are not human, they are not." The diary cuts off there. No wreck was ever found. No bodies washed ashore. Skeptics point to the lack of ship records matching his descriptions, or the fact that the logbook's binding contains stitching techniques uncommon for the period. But there's one detail that defies easy dismissal. Pressed between the last pages is a sliver of something translucent and sharp, like shattered glass, except it bends without breaking, and when held to flame, it doesn't melt. It hums. Perhaps the sailor was mad, perhaps the whole crew shared a fever dream, or perhaps for one terrible night, the gateway yawned wide enough to let something through, and the diary is all that's left of the man who saw too much. One thing's certain, no one's ever found the City of Glass again, but then again, no one's ever looked in the right place at the right time, or the wrong one. In the shadow of the old port town's ruins, modern explorers have walked where fishermen once cast their nets, only to learn that some thresholds aren't meant to be crossed. Take the case of Daniel Mercer, an urban explorer who documented his trip to the abandoned docks in 2009. His YouTube livestream showed nothing unusual at first: crumbling bricks, rusted chains, the occasional gull crying overhead. Then, around the 3-hour mark, his camera caught something his viewers almost missed: a patch of fog that didn't drift with the wind but pulsed as if breathing. Daniel's voice, usually steady, faltered as he whispered, "Guys, do you see that? The air's bending." The feed cut to static. Search teams found his backpack 2 days later on a beach 12 miles north, its contents perfectly dry. His phone still recording 48 hours of audio containing nothing but the sound of waves, and every few hours, a faint, rhythmic tapping like knuckles on wood. Then there's the chilling story of the Black Winter Expedition, a team of paranormal investigators who vanished in 2017. They'd boasted about bringing scientific rigor to the legends, packing electromagnetic field meters and infrared cameras. Their last transmission was a garbled voice note sent at 3:17 in the morning. The symbols are here carved into the rocks below the waterline. They're not old, they're fresh. Rescue crews discovered their campsite intact, coffee still warm in thermoses, their equipment running on looped footage of empty docks. But the real horror came weeks later when a fisherman reeled in one of their GoPros. The footage, though corrupted, showed a single frame no one could explain. A figure standing waist deep in the surf, its back to the camera, its head tilted at an impossible angle. The timestamp, 3:16 in the morning. Not all who vanish stay gone. In 2021, a hiker named Lena Petrov staggered into a gas station 30 miles inland, her clothes crusted with salt, her boots worn to shreds. She had no memory of the past 6 days, only fragments, the taste of metal in the air, a sound like glass breaking underwater, and an overwhelming urge to walk toward the sea, not away from it. Medical scans revealed no head trauma, no drugs in her system, just a single anomaly. The capillaries in her eyes had burst in perfect spirals, a pattern neurologists compared to tiny whirlpools. When shown photos of the port town ruins, she began shaking uncontrollably. She couldn't articulate why. What separates these cases from old fishermen's tales is the evidence left behind. The thermal camera that recorded a temperature drop of exactly 33 degrees in 3 seconds. The audio file where spectral analysis revealed a voice under the recorded static, whispering in a language not even AI could identify. The drone footage that, when slowed frame by frame, shows the shadow of something massive moving just beneath the water's surface, not swimming but unfolding. Perhaps the most unsettling detail, the disappearances follow a pattern older than the town itself. They cluster around the autumn equinox when the tides are highest and the moon hangs fat and low. They favor those who come seeking answers, not those who stumble upon the ruins by chance, and they leave behind the same breadcrumbs, salt-crusted clothing, devices drained of power yet still recording, and in every case, the smell of rotting flowers clinging to the missing person's belongings. So what's really happening? A quirk of geology playing tricks on the mind, a collective hallucination triggered by some unseen force, or proof that the gateway never closed, it just learned to be more selective about who it lets through. One thing's certain, the ruins don't give up their secrets easily, and sometimes they take payment in kind. The idea of dimensions brushing against our own like curtains in a breeze isn't just the stuff of campfire tales. It's a theory that's haunted the edges of physics for over a century. Picture the universe as a vast, crumpled sheet of paper, its folds pressing together in places where the fabric wears thin. Some researchers argue that the abandoned port town might sit precisely at one of these wrinkles, a place where the walls between realities grow fragile. It's not just fantasy. Even Einstein's equations hint at the possibility of space-time bending so sharply that it tears, creating bridges to, well, somewhere else. Take quantum physics, where particles routinely defy logic by existing in multiple states at once. If a single electron can occupy two places simultaneously, why couldn't an entire harbor exist in overlapping realities? String theorists propose that unseen dimensions might coil like microscopic spirals around every atom in our world, normally too tiny to notice unless something somewhere unravels them. And that's where the town's geography becomes eerily relevant. Geological surveys reveal a peculiar convergence of magnetic anomalies and underwater mineral deposits that, under the right conditions, could theoretically warp electromagnetic fields. Combine that with tidal forces strong enough to stress the very bedrock, and you've got a recipe for space-time itself faltering at the seams. Then there are the accounts that defy even speculative science. In 1974, a team of hydrologists measuring water salinity near the ruins reported their compasses spinning wildly, not just malfunctioning, but pointing consistently inland, as if north had shifted overnight. Decades later, satellite imagery would reveal a fleeting thermal signature over the harbor, a perfect circle of chilled water, 30 meters wide, where the surface temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. No current, no upwelling, no explanation. Could these be glimpses of something bleeding through from another layer of reality? Fringe scholars point to older clues. The three interlocking circles found carved into stones across the town. The same symbol Elias the scholar sketched bear a striking resemblance to diagrams in medieval alchemical texts representing the unbinding of worlds. And let's not forget the recurring descriptions of the gateway's appearance, not as a solid structure, but as a distortion, a ripple. Modern physicists describe hypothetical wormholes in nearly identical terms, tunnels through space-time that would look, to the naked eye, like a shimmer in the air, a mirage with physics behind it. But here's the chilling twist. If the town truly marks a weak spot between dimensions, it might explain why the disappearances follow patterns. Alternate realities wouldn't operate on the same timelines or physical laws. A sailor stepping through might experience minutes while decades pass here, or return to find his home unchanged, though his bones ache with the weight of years he never lived. It would clarify the artifacts too, objects crafted in a world where metals behave differently, where geometry follows alien rules. Even the ghosts could be something far stranger, echoes of versions of ourselves that took a different turn in a reality next door. Of course, not all scientists buy into interdimensional tourism. Skeptics argue that quantum weirdness doesn't scale up to harbor-sized rifts, and that human perception is too easily fooled by magnetic hiccups or methane-induced hallucinations. Yet even they admit the universe is vast and our understanding of it is a candle flickering in the dark. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, not a doorway, but a frayed thread in reality's tapestry, twitching when something on the other side tugs. So was the town a crossroads for wanderers between worlds, a laboratory for forces we're only beginning to name, or simply a place where the human mind, faced with the uncanny, weaves stories to fill the gaps? Whatever the answer, one thing's certain: the deeper you dig into the science, the more the legend of the Gateway starts to sound less like a fairy tale and more like a warning. The legend of the abandoned port town didn't just linger in fishermen's whispers, it seeped into the marrow of culture, shaping art, faith, and even the way we dream. Poets have penned verses about its mist-cloaked arches, their lines trembling with the same awe as those sailors who first glimpsed the impossible. Take the enigmatic works of Alaric Voss, a 19th-century romantic whose ode to the drowned gate describes the harbor as where the sea forgets its name and the sky learns to lie. His unpublished manuscripts, discovered in a Prague attic, contained sketches of the three interlocking circles, a proof that the symbol haunted more than just the town's stones. Novelists, too, couldn't resist the pull of the myth. In The Tides Between, Clara Mertens wove a Gothic tale of a widow who follows her vanished husband into the archway, only to return centuries later, her pockets filled with sand that glowed faintly in the dark. The book sparked a minor literary scandal in 1927, with critics dismissing it as hysterical fantasy, until a librarian in Marseille found an 18th-century diary with eerily similar descriptions of luminous sand in the ruins. Even Hollywood took a swing at the legend, though the 1954 film Harbour of the Damned replaced subtle horror with rubbery sea monsters. The director later admitted he'd toned down the script after a crew member swore they saw something too real in the fog during location scouting. But the most unsettling cultural footprint belongs to the Children of the Threshold, a secretive sect that still gathers in coastal villages from Norway to New England. Their doctrine that the gateway isn't a curse but a birthright, a divine trial for those brave enough to step through. Their rituals involve chanting in a language that linguists can't place, using iron bells tuned to a frequency that makes dogs howl for miles. In 2015, police raided a compound in Brittany to find walls covered in the three-circle symbol, alongside jars of seawater labeled with dates matching historical disappearances. The group's leader, a former physics professor, calmly told officers, "You'll understand when the tide eats the moon. So why does this story grip us so fiercely across centuries?" It's more than just spooky campfire fodder. The legend mirrors humanity's oldest, hungriest question: what else is out there? Every culture has its version of a threshold: the fairy ring, the Bermuda Triangle, the wardrobe to Narnia. These tales persist because they let us flirt with the idea that the world is stranger than it seems, that magic might still lurk in the cracks of our maps. The port town's gateway is special because it feels earned. Unlike a random UFO sighting or a ghost in the attic, this myth has rules. It appears under certain stars. It takes the curious, the reckless, the ones who lean too close. That's the real horror and the real allure. The legend suggests that some doors won't open unless you knock. And worse, they might just knock back. Government files don't usually smell like salt and old fear, but the ones stamped with the port town's coordinates do. Declassified in 2008 after decades buried in military archives, these documents read less like official reports and more like the scribblings of men who'd stared into something they couldn't explain. Take Operation Tidefall, a little-known Cold War project launched in 1959. On paper, it was a routine coastal survey. The reality, a team of naval engineers, 2 physicists, and most tellingly, a chaplain were dispatched to the ruins with orders to assess acoustic anomalies. Their findings were blacked out entirely, save for a single handwritten margin note. The bells are real, they're not made of metal. Then there's the infamous Fog Protocol memo from 1971, detailing emergency procedures for visual distortions exceeding standard meteorological parameters. Translation: when the air over the harbor started twisting itself into shapes that shouldn't exist, soldiers were ordered to evacuate civilians under the guise of chemical spill drills. One particularly chilling incident report describes a radar operator tracking an object moving against the wind at 200 knots before vanishing not from the screen, but into it, as if the blip had slipped behind the monitor's glass. The lieutenant who filed the report was reassigned to an Arctic listening post within 48 hours, but the real smoking gun surfaced in 2012 when a retired sonar technician came forward with a story that made even conspiracy theorists pause. In 1983, his submarine had been running silent exercises near the town's waters when their equipment picked up a structure, not a shipwreck or rock formation, but something with right angles and hollow chambers resting mid-water, suspended as if held by invisible cables. The kicker, it didn't appear on subsequent sweeps. When the crew requested permission to investigate, command responded with a single encrypted order: maintain depth. Do not acknowledge. Why the secrecy? Some researchers point to Cold War paranoia, a fear that the Soviets might weaponize whatever phenomenon lurked there. Others whisper of darker motivations. Before his death in 2016, a former Pentagon analyst let slip that certain files remained classified not for national security, but because they contained descriptions that would provoke inappropriate civilian inquiry. Like the 1989 infrared satellite image that allegedly showed a perfect circle of cold hovering over the harbor, a circle that, when enhanced, revealed humanoid silhouettes walking upside down along its inner edge. The most plausible theory might also be the simplest. Governments hate admitting they're out of their depth. When sailors vanish and instruments go mad, it's easier to stamp documents top secret than to confront the possibility that some doors shouldn't be opened, let alone that they might open themselves. As for what the military truly knew, that answer may still be buried, not in some vault, but in the one place no bureaucrat dares to look: the shifting sands beneath the old docks where the tide eats evidence twice a day. The lighthouse stood sentinel over the abandoned port for decades, its beam slicing through the night long after the last ship had sailed. But those who knew the keeper, a weathered old salt named Henrik Voss, said the light wasn't just for warning ships, it was for keeping something out. His logs, preserved in the Maritime Museum's restricted archives, start as mundane weather reports. Then, in the summer of 1956, the entries change. The first sign is subtle, a note about tides that don't match the charts. Then come the sketches, rough, hurried drawings of shapes crowding the edge of the beam's reach, their outlines jagged as broken glass. By autumn, his handwriting frays into near illegible scrawls. They don't cast shadows. One entry reads, "They are the shadows. The night the lighthouse fell, a storm wasn't on the radar." Fishermen a mile out swore the air was calm until the moment the tower's light flickered, then bent, as if the beam had hit an invisible prism. The keeper's final message, scribbled on a scrap of ledger paper and shoved into a whiskey bottle, was found wedged in the rocks below the cliff. Just 3 words: "It's coming through." Officials blamed the collapse on erosion, but the wreckage told a stranger story. The stones didn't crumble, they shattered, as if from a force pressing outward from within. And the lens, the 1,000-pound Fresnel glass designed to withstand hurricanes, wasn't just broken. It was melted, its edges fused into strange, organic shapes that made the salvage crew uneasy. One diver refused to touch it, claiming the glass was still warm after days in the icy water. But here's what chills the bones: the lighthouse log didn't end with the keeper's disappearance. For 3 nights after the collapse, the harbor master's office received blank pages in the mail, each one damp with salt water, each bearing a single fresh fingerprint in the corner. The prints matched Henrik's, the postmarks they came from towns along the coast, each one dated after the lighthouse fell. Maybe it was a hoax, maybe stress and isolation warped a good man's mind. But ask the old-timers in the village and they'll lower their voices. They remember the stories Henrik told in his cups, of figures standing just beyond the light's edge, their arms too long, their heads tilted like birds studying prey. They remember how he'd check the locks twice at dusk, how he'd nail iron horseshoes above every door, and they remember the last thing he ever said to the postmaster 3 days before the collapse: the light's not keeping them away anymore. It's showing them the way. The ruins of the lighthouse are still there, half swallowed by the sea. Visitors sometimes pocket a piece of the strange glass as a souvenir, until they notice how, in certain light, the shards don't just reflect. They move. Folklore isn't just fireside entertainment, it's the echo of something older, a whisper passed down until the details blur into myth. Could the legend of the gateway be more than superstition? Some researchers believe these stories are fractured memories of real events, warped by time but clinging to a kernel of truth. Think of Atlantis, a tale Plato swore came from Egyptian priests, or the global flood myths that mirror ancient climate shifts. The human mind doesn't invent from nothing. It reshapes what it can't explain. Take the town's recurring motif of the great eye beneath the waves. Oceanographers now recognize descriptions matching the behavior of underwater sinkholes, sudden vortices that swallow ships whole. In the Mediterranean, similar phenomena were documented as recently as 2016, when a fishing vessel vanished near Crete after reporting the sea opening like a mouth. Could early sailors have witnessed such an event and spun it into something more sinister? And what of the bells from the sea? Near the town's ruins, divers have discovered strange rock formations that, when struck by tides, produce metallic tones eerily close to the chimes described in medieval logs. Then there's the darker theory, forgotten technology. The ancient world held secrets we're only beginning to uncover. Greek fire, the Antikythera mechanism, Damascus steel. What if the gateway wasn't supernatural but something built? The 3 interlocking circles carved into the stones bear an uncanny resemblance to diagrams in Byzantine texts on burning mirrors, devices said to focus sunlight into weapons. Could a similar invention have created the illusion of an archway, a trick of light and optics mistaken for magic? Even the shifting city might have roots in real mirages, like the legendary Fata Morgana, where atmospheric layers bend light to conjure phantom cities on the horizon. But here's where the theories twist. Anthropologists studying oral traditions note a pattern. The more a story terrifies, the more likely it's based in trauma. The gateway tales share elements with volcanic eruptions, the choking fog, the unnatural lights, the sense of time slipping. The Mediterranean isn't known for volcanoes, but around 3,000 years ago, the island of Thera exploded with force that shattered civilizations. Ash clouds could have plunged the region into weeks of twilight, while tsunamis dragged entire villages into the sea. Survivors might have interpreted the disaster as the gods tearing open the world itself. Yet the most unsettling idea isn't that the legend is half true, it's that we've misunderstood which half. The artifacts, the vanishings, the impossible geometry of the slab map, these aren't the remnants of a natural disaster. They're the fingerprints of something that doesn't belong here. Perhaps the catastrophe wasn't earthly at all. Perhaps it was what came through. Among the silt and shattered timbers of the abandoned port, the most unsettling discoveries aren't the ruins themselves, but the things that don't belong there. Take the compass, its brass casing green with age, its needle spinning lazily as if drunk. Normally, these instruments align with Earth's magnetic field, pointing reliably north. This one, found wedged between the stones of the old customs house in 1989, doesn't obey the rules. It doesn't point anywhere, or rather, it points everywhere, twitching toward different directions when moved, as if the very concept of north had unraveled around it. Scientists who examined it found no mechanical tampering, no hidden magnets, just a needle that reacted violently to lunar phases, swinging wildly during the full moon as if tugged by something beyond the stars. Then there's the mirror, a handheld piece, its silver backing flaked with time, recovered from the belly of a fishing net in 2003. At first glance, it reflects the world as expected until you hold it toward the sky. Witnesses swear it doesn't show clouds or sun, but something darker, something older. A sky streaked with violet where the constellations don't match any known map. One researcher, after 3 minutes of staring into it, reportedly forgot the names of his children for 6 hours. The glass itself is cool to the touch, even in direct sunlight, and leaves a faint metallic scent on the skin like copper and ozone. But the artifact that chills the blood is the bell. Found in 2017 by urban explorers, it hung from a rusted hook in the skeleton of a collapsed chapel, its surface etched with those same 3 interlocking circles. No one had touched it, yet as the team approached, it rang. Not the hollow clang of aged bronze, but a sound like a struck crystal, high and clear and wrong. When they tried to remove it, the bell grew colder with every inch lifted from the hook, until frost spiderwebbed across their gloves. The moment they set it down, the ringing stopped. Audio analysis later revealed something impossible. The tone it produced didn't match any known harmonic frequency. It was, according to one physicist, a note that shouldn't exist in this universe's vibrational spectrum. Skeptics dismiss these objects as elaborate hoaxes, the work of pranksters or artists playing with history, but the dating doesn't lie. The bell's alloy matches medieval metallurgy, yet its acoustic properties defy physics. The mirror's glass composition aligns with 17th century techniques, but its reflective anomalies have no scientific parallel, and the compass. Its internal mechanisms are identical to those used by 15th century navigators except for the needle, which metallurgists confirm is made of an unknown material, dense as tungsten but light as aluminum. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how these artifacts were found, not buried in chests or hidden in walls, but placed conspicuously, as if waiting to be noticed. The compass sat atop a ruined desk, its needle still spinning. The mirror lay face up in the sand, catching moonlight no one else could see, and the bell. It hung at eye level, polished clean of corrosion, as if someone or something had been tending it. So what are we to make of these impossible relics, debris from a world bleeding into ours, tools left behind by travelers who found the gateway and stepped through? Or something far stranger, objects that aren't artifacts at all, but living things, dormant and waiting for the right hands to wake them. One thing's certain, the ruins don't just hold the echoes of what's been lost. They hold whispers of what's coming back. The sound begins as a whisper, a faint, wordless hum that curls around the edges of hearing, just soft enough to make you question whether it's real. Visitors to the abandoned harbor swear they've heard it, especially at twilight, when the air hangs heavy between sea and shore. Some describe it as choir-like, a harmony of voices woven into a single note. Others insist it's mechanical, the distant whir of some unseen engine. But here's the catch: point a microphone toward the ruins and the recording comes back silent. No hum, no echo, just the ordinary creak of old wood and the sigh of waves. Scientists call this phenomenon auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to conjure meaning from random noise, like hearing whispers in static. But that explanation rings hollow for those who have stood on the crumbling docks, feeling the vibration of that sound in their bones. Take the case of Elena Shaw, a sound engineer who visited in 2019. She brought professional equipment, determined to debunk the legend. What she captured wasn't the hum itself, but something stranger: the exact moment it stopped. Her hydrophone, submerged near the old pilings, recorded a sudden, unnatural drop in ambient noise, as if the sea itself had paused to listen. Then, for 3 seconds, the device picked up a frequency so low it registered more as pressure than sound. When Elena played it back, her dog howled and refused to enter the room for hours. Then there are the accounts that defy even psychological explanations. In 2012, a group of paranormal investigators claimed the hum wasn't just heard, it responded. When one of them whistled a note, the hum echoed it back, pitch perfect, though their instruments detected nothing. Another team in 2020 reported feeling the sound before hearing it, a tingling in their teeth like biting foil, moments before the melody began. Most chilling of all, the handful of visitors who have tried to follow the sound toward its source. They describe walking toward the water, convinced the hum is coming from just offshore, only to realize they've wandered halfway down the beach with no memory of moving. So what's really happening? Neurologists point to the harbor's unique acoustics, how wind funneling through the ruins might create infrasound, frequencies too low for human ears to register, but known to trigger unease or even hallucinations. Others suggest the hum could be a form of sound mirage, where temperature layers in the air bend distant noises into something unrecognizable. But that doesn't explain why so many witnesses across decades describe the same eerie quality to the sound, a sense that it's not just noise but communication. Perhaps the most unsettling theory comes from an obscure branch of physics researching phantom vibrations, frequencies that exist outside the spectrum we can measure. Some speculate the harbor sits atop a confluence of geological faults, where shifting rocks emit vibrations that resonate with the human nervous system. It's not that the sound isn't there, it's that we lack the tools to hear it as anything but a ghost of itself. Or maybe the truth lies in the old fisherman's warning: the hum isn't meant to be recorded. It's meant to be felt, a call from something that doesn't want to be found, a signal flickering at the edge of perception, waiting for the right listener to finally answer. The port town's eerie legacy didn't just fade into history, it seeped into the pages of books and flickered across silver screens, morphing with each retelling to suit the fears of the age. One of the earliest fictionalized accounts appeared in 1848, tucked between the crumbling covers of a penny dreadful titled The Gatekeeper's Daughter. The story followed a fisherman's bride who vanishes into the mist, only to return years later, her wedding dress dry as bone, whispering of a city where the streets rearranged themselves at night. Critics dismissed it as cheap sensationalism, until a London librarian noticed something chilling. The author, who wrote under a pseudonym, had included details about the harbor's layout that matched no surviving maps, yet matched perfectly with the town's original medieval blueprints, lost for centuries. By the early 1900s, the legend had slithered into Gothic literature, repackaged as morality tales for the industrial age. In The Tides That Bind, a crumbling epistolary novel from 1909, the gateway becomes a metaphor for forbidden knowledge. A young scientist rows into the archway, convinced he can harness its power, only to return with his intellect shattered, babbling about angles that cut the mind. The book flopped in its day, but modern scholars pore over its descriptions of the three-circle symbol, which predate its rediscovery in the ruins by decades. Some even argue the novel wasn't fiction at all, but a coded warning from someone who'd glimpsed the truth and lived to dress it in allegory. Hollywood, of course, couldn't resist the myth's cinematic potential, though the results often traded subtlety for spectacle. The 1932 horror flick Harbour of Lost Souls depicted the gateway as a literal door of glowing mist, complete with rubbery tentacles snatching sailors. Studio memos reveal the director insisted on filming near the actual ruins, only to abandon the location after half the crew fell violently ill. Rumor has it the footage they shot that week was destroyed, not for being unusable, but for being too real. One surviving still shows an extra in the background, her face blurred except no extra matching her description was ever hired. But the most unsettling adaptation might be the one that never made it to theaters. In 1978, surrealist filmmaker Alejandro Velez secured funding for The Drowning Gate, an avant-garde project shot entirely on location. His notes describe a scene where actors would walk into the sea at low tide, disappearing into the fog without cuts or trick photography. The production shut down after 3 days when Velez vanished mid-shoot. His camera was found still rolling, its final frames showing nothing but the empty dock and a single ripple in the water moving against the current. What makes these retellings so compelling isn't just their chills, it's how they twist the legend to reflect the anxieties of their time. The Victorian era painted the gateway as a punishment for curiosity. The Cold War reimagined it as an interdimensional breach, ripe for government cover-ups. Modern indie games like Tides of Elsewhere turn it into a psychological labyrinth, where the real horror isn't what lies beyond, but what the characters bring with them. Each version leaves its mark, adding layers to the myth until it's impossible to separate fact from folklore. Perhaps that's the point. The truth about the port town was never meant to be pinned down. Like the gateway itself, the story shifts shape, revealing just enough to unsettle us but never enough to satisfy. After all, the best legends don't end. They wait. Isolation does something strange to the human mind. It amplifies whispers into shouts, turns shadows into figures, and transforms ordinary places into thresholds of the unknown. But the abandoned port town story isn't just about physical remoteness. It's about a different kind of isolation, the kind that seeps into the bones of a community until fleeing becomes the only option. Historians sifting through the town's records found a pattern that chills the blood. The exodus didn't happen gradually. It came in waves, as if something in the harbor's depths pulsed like a slow-beating heart, driving people away in rhythmic terror. Take the winter of 1492, when half the town's population vanished in a single month. Official ledgers blame plague, but the parish priest's private journal tells a different story. He wrote of nightmares that spread like contagion, villagers waking screaming of the thing in the well, their faces gaunt from nights spent fighting sleep. Those who stayed reported footsteps pacing their ceilings after dark, though the attics stood empty. Then came the final straw. The morning the fishermen found every boat in the harbor scrawled with the same phrase, etched in brine-hardened lines, "Leave or be left." Within weeks, the town was half deserted. Psychologists call this collective flight response, when a shared, unnameable dread becomes so overwhelming that an entire community abandons rationality for survival. But here's the unsettling twist. The town's archives show these mass departures coincided with lunar cycles, always peaking when the moon hung fattest over the harbor. Even stranger, the few families who resisted the panic and stayed behind often met grislier fates. Tax records from 1508 list a dozen households struck from the rolls with a single notation: property reverted to the crown, yet no wills, no graves, no evidence they ever left. It's as if the town didn't just empty itself, it digested the stubborn. Modern researchers have a term for this phenomenon: geographical uncanny. Certain places seem to reject human presence, not through natural disasters or harsh conditions, but through something far subtler, annoying, inarticulate wrongness that drives even the most rooted inhabitants to flee. In Japan, they speak of jubako, trees that feed on the energy of the lost. In the American Southwest, ghost towns like Jerome, Arizona, whisper of mine shafts where prospectors swore they heard voices singing from solid rock. But the port town's curse, if that's what it was, had a cruel specificity. It didn't just scare people away, it selected them. Survivors' accounts scattered across centuries share eerie commonalities. A merchant's wife in 1623 wrote to her sister of a rotting sweetness that clung to the air before each departure wave, so thick it turned milk sour in the jug. A ship's log from 1791 describes dogs howling in unison at the tide line moments before a fishing crew vanished mid-meal, their porridge still steaming. The most chilling detail: those who escaped often spoke of a final, unshakable certainty, not fear, not panic, but a quiet, almost relieved knowledge that it was time to go. As if something had gently closed a door behind them, whispering, "This place was never yours." So was the abandonment supernatural, psychological, or something in between, a perfect storm of isolation, suggestion, and whatever ancient force still hums beneath those crumbling docks. One thing's certain: ghost towns usually fade quietly into history. This one didn't just fade, it pushed, and whatever did the pushing might still be there, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close, to linger too long, to forget that some doors once closed should never be opened again. In the summer of 2020, a marine archaeology team made headlines when their sonar equipment picked up something impossible near the abandoned harbor. The researchers had been mapping the seabed for a routine coastal survey when their screens lit up with an anomaly, a structure rising from the ocean floor, its shape too symmetrical to be natural. The scans showed two towering pillars connected by a curved lintel, forming what looked unmistakably like an archway, its base buried in sediment. The dimensions were staggering: nearly 30 meters tall, wide enough for a modern cargo ship to pass through. But the real shock came when they tried to document it further. Their high-resolution cameras glitched, displaying only static when aimed at the structure. Depth sensors gave erratic readings, bouncing between 20 meters and 200 in the span of seconds. And then, without warning, the sonar itself failed, emitting a frequency so high it shattered the team's eardrums through their headphones. The official report blamed a malfunctioning transducer, but the crew's private accounts tell a different story. One technician swore the static on their screens wasn't random. It pulsed in patterns that matched the rhythm of the three-circle symbol found carved throughout the ruins. The lead researcher, a no-nonsense geophysicist with 20 years of experience, later confessed to hearing something through the hydrophones in those final moments. Not the usual clicks of marine life or the groan of shifting rock, but a sound he could only describe as metal breathing. By the time a second expedition could be mounted, storms had churned the seabed into a murky haze. The archway, if it had ever been there at all, was gone. Skeptics were quick to dismiss the discovery as a trick of the light or a glitch in the software. Yet the incident eerily echoed a 19th-century account from a British naval survey, where sailors claimed to have spotted a submerged cathedral in the same waters, its spires visible just beneath the waves on calm mornings. That expedition, too, ended abruptly when half the crew fell ill with a fever that left them whispering of faces in the water. Modern oceanographers point out that the harbor sits atop a network of underwater caves where collapsing limestone could theoretically form arch-like structures. But that doesn't explain why similar shapes appear in local folklore long before sonar existed, or why every attempt to photograph them meets with resistance. The most unsettling detail came from an unexpected source, the team's AI image analysis software. Before the system crashed, it flagged something in the sonar static that human eyes had missed. Enhanced scans revealed faint, glyph-like markings along the arch's inner edge, not random erosion but deliberate carvings. When compared to the symbols in Elias the Scholar's journal, the match was undeniable. 3 interlocking circles appeared at regular intervals, just as they did on the artifacts pulled from the harbor mud. Coincidence could explain one anomaly. But a submerged structure matching centuries-old descriptions, adorned with the same mysterious symbols, defying every attempt to document it, that strains credulity. Perhaps the most chilling possibility isn't that the sonar glimpsed a man-made archway lost to time, but that it caught something far older briefly surfacing from the depths. Something that, for a moment, remembered its shape. The researchers never returned to the site. Their funding was quietly reallocated, their findings buried in technical jargon. But if you tracked down one of them after a few drinks, they might admit the truth. The sea didn't hide that structure from them, it reclaimed it, and whatever lies beneath those waves isn't done revealing itself yet. The fisherman's name was never officially recorded, just another weathered face in a long line of men who'd spent their lives wrestling the sea. But what washed ashore with him that storm-lashed morning in 1991 wasn't just another victim of the waves. His skin was bleached pale as driftwood, his lips cracked with salt, yet his clothes were dry, not damp, not stiff with brine, dry as if he'd stepped out of a sealed room rather than the belly of the ocean. The villagers who found him said his eyes were the worst part, not glassy with shock but wide and focused, darting between their faces as if searching for something behind their features. His ravings made no sense at first. He spoke of a night that never ended, of water so black it drank the light. Then came the detail that froze the blood of everyone in that cramped clinic. The sky had 2 moons, he whispered, his fingers knotting in the sheets. One white, one wrong. The attending nurse later swore his pupils contracted when he said it, as if recoiling from a memory too bright to bear. When pressed, he described shapes moving between the dunes, not people, not animals, but something that walked through the sand like it was wearing the beach as a coat. Then came his final words, gasped between rattling breaths as dawn bled through the clinic's shutters. They're waiting for us, not watching, not hunting. Waiting, the specificity of that verb haunts every retelling. Waiting implies patience, a plan. Most chilling of all, the fisherman's hands, clenched in rigor mortis, held a fistful of sand that shouldn't have existed on that stretch of coast, granules too coarse, too sharply angled, glittering with a metallic sheen that made the coroner's scalpel hum when brought too close. Officials dismissed it as delirium, the ravings of a sun-addled mind, but locals knew better. They'd heard similar stories whispered by great-grandparents who'd known the port in its dying days. A trawl through old newspapers reveals a pattern. Every few decades, someone stumbles out of the mist with the same impossible tale. In 1883, a lighthouse keeper's daughter vanished for 3 days, returning with her hair turned white and her pockets full of that same strange sand. In 1929, a lifeboat from the vanished freighter Star of Aragon was found adrift with a single survivor, his logbook filled with sketches of twin moons and a shoreline that bent like a bowstring. The fisherman's testimony might have been forgotten entirely if not for the notebook found tucked inside his oilskin jacket. The pages were warped with moisture, but one entry remained legible, a single latitude and longitude, scrawled over and over as if to carve it into memory. When plotted, the coordinates didn't point to any shipping lane or fishing ground. They marked a patch of open ocean 3 miles southwest of the abandoned harbor. A place where depth charts show nothing but featureless seabed, yet naval sonar scans declassified in 2012 tell a different story. That exact spot appears as a blank void in the data, not static, not interference, but a perfect sphere of silence where sound waves simply stop. Oceanographers have no explanation. The fisherman's notebook now sits in a university archive, sealed in a lead-lined case after the glass display cabinet around it cracked spontaneously one night, the fracture lines tracing the same 3 interlocking circles found carved throughout the ruins. So what did he see? A hallucination, a glimpse through some tear in the fabric of the world, or something far older, a truth that the sea usually keeps hidden, but sometimes when the tides align just so, let slip to remind us how small our maps truly are. The villagers buried him quickly without a marker. They know better than to name what might be listening. The greatest mysteries aren't the ones we solve, they're the ones that refuse to stay buried, whispering from the edges of history with questions that outlive their answers. Centuries have turned the abandoned port town's legend into a hall of mirrors, where every theory reflects another layer of the unknowable. Why here, of all places? Geologists point to the unique confluence of tidal currents and magnetic anomalies, as if the Earth itself conspired to thin the veil. Historians trace the town's origins to a forgotten cult of sea worshippers who carved those 3 interlocking circles into every cornerstone, their prayers perhaps opening a door they couldn't close. But none explain why children's laughter still echoes in the ruins on windless nights, or why the vanished always seem to leave one thing behind, a single shoe, a wedding ring, a key, as if some part of them clawed back at the last moment. And what of the gateway itself? If it exists, is it a bridge or a wound? Medieval texts speak of the Lord's cracks, fissures where divine creation fractured. Modern quantum physicists describe cosmic strings, defects in spacetime left over from the birth of the universe. Both sound eerily like the archway described by Sister Marguerite, humming with the sound of 1,000 bells underwater. But the most chilling possibility isn't that the gateway is unnatural, it's that it's always been here, older than the town, older than the sea, patiently waiting for human curiosity to stumble upon it. Then there's the unspoken question, the one that coils in the stomach of every researcher who's studied the ruins. What waits on the other side? The sailor Luca swore it was a city of shifting spires, but the scholar Elias's torn journal hints at something far less structured, a place where the angles hate us, where geometry itself rebels. Recent analysis of the artifacts suggests an even darker theory. The unknown metal in the compass, the glass that moves when unobserved, the sand that glows faintly in moonless nights, these aren't relics of another world. They're warnings. The 3 interlocking circles may not be a symbol at all, but a label, a marker stamped on our reality by something saying, "This one's occupied." Perhaps the truth lies scattered in the gaps between accounts, the nun's gateway that appears under the right moon, the fisherman's twin moons, the sonar's vanishing archway. They might all be facets of the same impossible truth that the town doesn't house a single gateway but a fracture point, a place where realities bleed together at random. It would explain why no 2 descriptions match, why the rules seem to change with each encounter. The real horror isn't that the doorway opens, it's that we never know which door we're stepping through. And yet, There are those who insist the answers are closer than we think. In 2018, a team of linguists claimed the three-circle symbol matches a recurring glyph in the Voynich manuscript, that infamous medieval book written in an unbreakable code. A retired NASA engineer recently demonstrated how the Harbour's magnetic anomalies could, under precise conditions, generate a temporary wormhole stable enough to pass a human through. Even the old villagers' rituals take on new meaning, their iron sickles mirroring the arch's curve, not to mock it, but to anchor it, like a nail holding shut a door. The most unsettling possibility that we've been asking the wrong questions all along. It's not about why the gateway exists, it's about why we can perceive it. Human brains evolved to recognize patterns, to fill gaps. But what if some gaps aren't meant to be filled? The town's final lesson might be the simplest and most terrible. Some doors should remain unopened, not because they're forbidden, but because whatever's on the other side has been knocking for a reason. The abandoned port town lingers in the collective imagination like a half-remembered dream. Its crumbling docks not just relics of a forgotten trade route, but fragments of a story too strange to dismiss entirely. Whether the gateway was a trick of light on water, a collective hallucination, or something far older than human history, its legacy endures precisely because it defies easy answers. This isn't just a ghost story, it's a mirror held up to our own hunger for the inexplicable. Every era gets the mysteries it deserves. Medieval sailors saw cities in the mist, Victorian scholars whispered of lost dimensions, and modern theorists dissect sonar anomalies, yet the core remains unchanged. Some places refuse to fit neatly into the map of the known world. Consider how the tale adapts without losing its teeth. 18th century priests blamed demons, 20th century scientists pointed to methane vents, and today's quantum speculators talk of dimensional tears, all grappling with the same uncanny phenomena dressed in different jargon. The three interlocking circles carved into the stones might represent alchemical realms to one scholar, a warning label from ancient visitors to another, or just the idle doodles of a bored stonemason. But here's what unites every interpretation: the human need to explain, even when faced with the unexplainable. That tension between the itch to solve and the awe of surrender is where the legend thrives. Perhaps the most profound lesson isn't about the gateway at all, but about those who sought it. The scholar Elias, the nun Marguerite, the fisherman with his twin moons. They weren't just victims or liars. They were witnesses to something that rewired their understanding of reality. Their accounts read like dispatches from the edge of human perception, where language and logic fray. When Luca described the sky burning violet, or when the lighthouse keeper wrote of shadows that were the shadows, they weren't crafting metaphors, they were groping for words to describe a truth that outran them. And what of the artifacts, the humming bell, the wrong-angled slab, the compass that forgot north? These aren't just plot devices in a spooky yarn. They're physical challenges to our assumptions. Science tells us matter behaves predictably, yet here are objects that laugh at the rules. Maybe they're hoaxes, maybe they're misdated, or maybe they're proof that the universe is far weirder than our textbooks allow. The real horror isn't that they exist, but that they persist, quietly eroding our certainty with every carbon-dated anomaly. So where does that leave us? Knee-deep in the harbor's brine, staring at a horizon that might hide anything or nothing. The town's greatest trick isn't the gateway, it's the way it makes us complicit in the mystery. Every retelling, every expedition, every YouTube video like this one adds another layer to the myth, ensuring the story never truly dies. That's why we keep circling back to those rotting docks, not to find answers, but to remember how it feels to be deliciously, terrifyingly small in a universe that keeps its oldest secrets locked tight. Now it's your turn. Have you ever stood somewhere that thrummed with the same eerie energy? Do you think the gateway was real or just the fevered dream of a lonely coast? Drop your theories below. The weirder, the better. And if you're craving more deep dives into history's shadowy corners, hit that subscribe button. The next mystery is all